All right, let's dive into an absolutely epic story. We're going on a 5,000-year journey through ancient India, a civilization whose incredible ideas, everything from the number zero to some of the world's biggest religions, still shape our world in profound ways.
But that brings up a huge question, right? How do you even begin to tell a story that's 5 millennia old? We're talking about a time when whole empires have risen and turned to dust, when great cities have literally been swallowed by the earth. So where do you even start looking for the truth?
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to play detective and see how we unearth the past. Then, we'll visit the very first cities and the culture of the Vedic age. After that, we'll watch as huge empires and brand new faiths rise up, celebrate a mind-blowing classical golden age, and then finally, see how it all transitions into a new medieval era. Let's get started.
Okay, first things first, to even start building this story, we have to follow the clues. It's like we're assembling a giant puzzle, using just the fragments that ancient people left behind for us.
So how do we know any of this stuff? Well, historians have this amazing toolkit. There's archaeology, which is all about digging up the physical stuff, cities, tools, pottery. Then you've got epigraphy, which is the super cool art of decoding ancient writing carved on rocks and metal. Numismatics is all about studying old coins, which tell you who was in charge and who they were trading with. And of course, there are the literary sources, sacred texts, poems, and even travel diaries from foreigners that give us a glimpse into how people thought and lived.
For the longest time, a huge chunk of India's early history was a complete mystery, locked behind scripts nobody could read. The absolute game changer was cracking the code of Brahmi. It's the mother script for most of the writing systems in India today, and deciphering it was like finding a Rosetta Stone. Suddenly, ancient pillars and rocks that had been silent for thousands of years could finally speak.
All right, with our historian's toolkit ready, let's jump in our time machine and go way, way back to the very beginning of civilization in India, to its first incredible cities.
Now, this is just amazing to think about. At the same time the Great Pyramids were being built in Egypt, another incredibly sophisticated urban civilization was popping up along the Indus River. This was one of the world's original cradles of civilization.
And these people were seriously advanced. We're not talking about a few mud huts. Their cities were built on a grid, like modern New York. They had sophisticated drainage systems, garbage collection, and massive public baths. They were also master traders, using standardized weights and seals. But here's the kicker, that one big, frustrating question mark. For all their sophistication, we still have no idea how to read their writing. It's one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries.
Then, around 1900 BCE, this vibrant civilization just faded away. The great cities were abandoned. And we're still not totally sure why. Was it climate change that shifted the rivers? Was it invasion? We don't know for sure, but it left a huge vacuum. So the question is, what or who came next?
What replaced that urban culture was something completely different. It was like a total 180-degree turn. Society went from being city-based and trade-focused to being rural, pastoral, and organized around tribal clans. And, crucially, instead of a written script, their most important knowledge was passed down through an incredibly powerful oral tradition.
And at the very heart of this new era were the Vedas. Now, it's so important to get this. These weren't originally books. They were a massive oral library of sacred knowledge, composed in the ancient Sanskrit language. They were memorized perfectly and passed down from teacher to student, word for centuries, 1,000 years, maybe more, before they were ever written down. They are the absolute bedrock of Hinduism.
Then, around 1000 BC, a new technology comes along and changes everything: iron. The widespread use of strong iron tools meant people could finally clear the super-dense forests of the Ganga Valley. That agricultural boom meant more food, which meant villages could grow into towns, and towns could become the heart of new kingdoms. And of course, with all that growth, society itself became way more complex and organized.
All these new kingdoms bumping up against each other? Well, you know what that means. It sets the stage perfectly for our next chapter, an era of intense competition, the rise of India's first great empire, and a simultaneous revolution in how people thought about life itself.
So by the 6th century BCE, you've got this political free-for-all happening. The map of the Ganga Plains is basically a patchwork of 16 big, powerful kingdoms called the Mahajanapadas, and they're all fighting to be number one. It was a time of constant warfare and clever alliances.
But in this kind of high-stakes game, there's usually one player that rises above the rest. And in this case, that kingdom was Magadha. Thanks to a great location, tons of iron ore for weapons, and some seriously ambitious rulers, Magadha set out to conquer everyone.
And the man who finally achieved that goal was Chandragupta Maurya. He was a brilliant young guy who seized the throne of Magadha. But he wasn't alone. He had this legendary, and some would say ruthless advisor named Chanakya. Together, they didn't just conquer the other kingdoms, they united them, forging the very first true pan-Indian empire, the Mauryan Empire.
The empire hit its absolute peak under Chandragupta's grandson, Ashoka. Now, Ashoka started out as a pretty brutal conqueror, expanding the empire with a series of bloody wars. But one campaign in particular, the conquest of Kalinga, would change him and history forever. He was so horrified by the death and destruction he caused in that war that he had a profound spiritual awakening. He converted to Buddhism and completely changed his philosophy of rule. Instead of conquering with the sword, he decided to conquer with Dharma, a principle of peace, morality, and public good. He had edicts like this one carved on rocks all over his empire for everyone to see.
And Ashoka's personal transformation was part of a much bigger wave of change happening at the time. All across the plains, thinkers and seekers were starting to question the old ways, looking for new answers to the deepest questions of life and suffering.
And two of the most influential new paths to emerge came from two teachers who actually lived around the same time. Mahavira, the great teacher of Jainism, taught a path of strict self-discipline and absolute nonviolence toward every living thing. On the other hand, Gautama Buddha taught what he called the middle path, a balanced way of life that avoids the extremes of luxury and harshness to achieve enlightenment. Both of these faiths would go on to change the world.
So, after the huge Mauryan Empire eventually fell apart, India went through another period where things were a bit fragmented. But then came a new dynasty that kicked off an era so brilliant, so full of achievement, that we call it India's classical golden age.
The Gupta Empire managed to reunite a huge part of northern India. But honestly, its real legacy wasn't just about controlling territory. It was about the unbelievable explosion of science, art, and philosophy that happened under its watch. I mean, just listen to some of the breakthroughs from this period. In math, they developed the decimal system and, get this, the concept of zero. Our entire digital world is impossible without that. Their astronomers figured out the solar year with incredible accuracy and proposed that the Earth was a sphere that rotated on its axis. Doctors were performing complex surgeries, and their artists created some of the most beautiful temples and paintings the world has ever seen. And it wasn't just science. The arts were absolutely on fire. This was the time of Kaliyadasa, who's basically the Shakespeare of India, writing these incredible plays. You had the Panchatatantra, a collection of animal fables whose stories traveled all over the world. And there were amazing scientific works on everything you can imagine. It was a true renaissance. But, as we all know, no golden age can last forever. The Gupta Empire eventually weakened, and its decline opened the door to a brand new and much more complicated period of Indian history. So once that big unifying empire faded, what happened? You guessed it, the political map fractured again. Instead of one central power, you now had a whole collection of powerful regional kingdoms, each with its own unique culture and its own ambitions. This timeline gives you a great sense of how it all unfolded. The Gupta collapse in the 6th century leaves a power vacuum. Some strong regional kings try to fill it, but their empires don't last. Then you see the rise of these powerful Rajput warrior clans. But at the same time, a totally new factor enters the equation. Waves of invasions from the west, first by Arabs and later by Turkic armies, who would completely reshape the subcontinent.
Now, it's so easy to look at all this fighting and think of it as a dark age, but that is not the whole story, not at all. While there was a ton of conflict, this was also a period of incredible cultural creativity. The courts of all these different regional kingdoms became hotspots for unique art, architecture, and literature, creating the amazing diversity we still see in India today.
Whew, what a ride! So let's just quickly recap our 5,000-year adventure. We started with those mysterious early cities, then dove into the oral traditions of the Vedic age, saw the massive unification under the Mauryan Empire, celebrated the genius of the Gupta Golden Age, and finished with the shift into a fragmented but incredibly vibrant medieval world. And that brings us right here, to the present. Because none of this is just dusty, forgotten history. The faiths that were born in this era are now practiced by billions. The concept of zero from the goop to age is literally powering the device you're watching this on right now. The languages, the philosophies, the social structures, their echoes are all around us. So the real question I want to leave you with is this. As you look at the world today, where do you see the legacy of this ancient journey?